Hey folks, Dr. Rowe. Just thought I'd check in with you. I started Money Week last week and got through some of the key areas. I thought I'd pick it up again today. Apologies about the background here. Got work going on, as you can see. So we've talked about income, expenses. We talked about the mindset around money last week. We also talked about credit blur. I wanted to talk to you briefly this afternoon about assets and liabilities. It's a question that comes up. Sometimes people don't quite understand the difference between that and, for example, income expenses. So when we're talking about assets and liabilities, this is basically to do with a liability is something, it's a debt, it's an outstanding debt that you carry. So that could be a loan, could be a mortgage, for example. You may have money on a credit card, that would be a liability as well. So anytime that you've borrowed money from somebody else, I'm just trying to help simplify this for those of you that don't fully understand it. And I'll explain why we need to know this in a minute. So the liabilities are what we owe other people. Assets essentially are things that we own that have some value in them, that if you were to sell them, that you could liquidate that cash. So for example, if you owned a house and that property was unencumbered with no mortgage on it, then the full value of that property would be the asset. So let's say £150,000 property and there's zero mortgage on that property, then you're looking at £150,000 worth of value in that asset. If it had a mortgage on it of say 100,000, then your actual net asset value of that property would be 150,000 value minus 100,000 mortgage, leaving you with £50,000. That would be the equity in the house, if you like, if you're keeping it a simple calculation. So that, but it could equal gold. Let's say you've got gold stored away somewhere and the value of that gold is £12,000. That would be another asset that you might have in your name. You may have stocks in the stock market. You may have shares in a particular stock, and the value of those shares might be £2,450, dollars, euros, whatever. That would be the asset value of that particular wealth vehicle. So what we're doing here is we're adding up all of our assets and all of our liabilities. And I think it's, and by the way, if you really want to do this exercise properly, key approach to this is to strip through everything that you physically own, and then did you buy it for cash or did you buy it on borrowing? And if you borrowed it on borrowing, how much is that borrowing? So you got a car. The car is worth £27,550, and you've borrowed £20,550 to buy it. That means £7,000 of your money is in it. The rest is borrowed from a bank. So that would be a separation of your assets and liabilities. So you can simply do, the basic way to do it is if I had a piece of paper in front of me, split it down the middle. And on one side, you put the title assets, on the other side, you put liabilities, and you list all your liabilities on one side. So you can put what the name of it is and what you owe, and that comes to a total. On the other side, you've got all your assets, add those up, and that comes to a total. Hopefully, if you've done it right, your assets will be greater than your liabilities, which means you're liquid in the sense that, or you have a value, a positive net worth. So let's say your total value of your assets comes to 1 million, and the total value of your liabilities comes to 800,000, then you have a net worth on paper there of 200,000. Now, there's obviously other factors that come into this because I don't know other things that you may have in the background, but that's a simple way to look at it. This is different to income and expenses. Income expenses is your ability to look at what's going in and out on a monthly basis. That's what's keeping you afloat. That's what's keeping you liquid. Your assets and liabilities aren't things that specifically are affecting your day-to-day living costs, your running costs, all of those things. Your lifestyle isn't directly affected by your income and assets, so your assets and liabilities. So in simple terms, you may have £1 million worth of assets. You may have £800,000 worth of liabilities. You may have, for the sake of argument, £6,000 a month going out to support those liabilities, and you may have an income. And by the way, that's liabilities including your lifestyle and everything else now. I'm talking about the outgoing expenses. So your outgoing expenses could be what it costs you to eat, what it costs you to travel, what it costs you to put a roof over your head on a monthly basis, for example, and then utility bills, etc. And then on top of that, so let's say that costs you £3,000 a month. You might then have another £3,000 a month in monthly payments on those liabilities. So this is where it starts to come into play now. Everything integrates together. You have your loan over here. to support all those loans, could be 5 loans, is costing you, for the sake of argument, £3,000 a month. Other lifestyle costs are £3,000 a month. That gives you a total of £6,000 a month going out, of which £3,000 is to support your loans, your liabilities. You then have £8,000 a month coming in from your income over here. So in that case, you have what's called a residual cash flow at the end of a month of £2,000, £8,000 in, £6,000 out. Now, if you were to reduce your liabilities, it means you owe less money to people. So if you cleared off all those liabilities, effectively your outgoing expenses now reduced down to 0 on your expenses for your liabilities. Let me recap that. Remember, we said £3,000 going out to cover the liabilities, £3,000 for your normal household bills, etc. So if you were to clear down the liabilities, all of a sudden your monthly outgoing costs for those liabilities goes down. So that means you're now only left with £3,000 a month going out. So this is where the exercise comes into play when you're doing this, which is to look at what your liabilities are, what your assets are, what your income and your expenses are, and then you start to play a game between all of those to find out how you can support yourself in a more effective way on a monthly basis. Sometimes you have to sell off assets to help clear down some liabilities to move you forward. Now that's something you're going to have to seek advice over. I've done it myself in the past, and it's something, it comes down to your own personal circumstances. And a lot of people say, well, I don't want to get rid of my assets. Well, that's fine. That's a conversation you have to have with yourself in terms of planning into the future. But for now, I think it's a really good exercise for those of you watching this. If you've been following me over the last week, is to go back and watch the videos. But now looking at your income and assets and liabilities and expenses, start to create a little bit of a grid. So you could have 4 separate spreadsheets. One giving you your outgoing expenses, and another one giving your outgoing, so expenses for household living, and then expenses for liabilities. Income coming in, then you list out your assets, and then you list out your liabilities. And then if you are challenged, you might need to start to have a conversation about, well, what's it going to cost me? So for example, anyone that's taken out a loan in the last 3 or 4 months during COVID, it might be a bounce back loan, for example. Those interests will kick in next year. You need to plan ahead for that. That's something to take into consideration that it comes out of your business. And when somebody tries to measure their wealth in terms of asset-based, often they go, well, I've got £1 million worth of property. Great. So how much do you owe on that? So then the true measure of that net wealth is the assets minus the liabilities. And you also got to look at the liabilities and the assets that you hold right now. Sometimes you may be holding on to an asset that actually has the ability to appreciate quite rapidly over time. Other assets may not appreciate. So then it becomes a conversation with yourself about, well, what if I was to release this asset here as opposed to this one over here? Asset number 1 is not going to appreciate much over the next 5 years, whereas asset number 2 may appreciate over the next 5 years. So if I need to liquidate and create some cash out to maybe pull down a liability, I let go of the asset that's not likely to appreciate much over the next couple of years, simply in this example, because number 1 or number 2, whichever one I was referring to there, one is going to go up like that, one is going to be very flat. So I'm looking ahead for the next 5 years, and I'm thinking, well, it makes sense to hold on to the one that's going to go up like that, get rid of this one, clear down some debt. Unless, of course, it happens to be that the one that's quite flat is a property, for example, that's producing a lot more cash flow than the gradient that's going up like this. So for property investors, the dilemma becomes then, what do I sell? The capital growth property or the income property? And that comes down to your own personal strategies. So you can see how all this fits together and how important it is to consider all the factors. So income, assets, liabilities and expenses, all 4 work together in harmony. What we'll take a look at next on my next video will be cash flow forecasting.